Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Giant Group. Today's topic is becoming an MSP, the benefits, the challenges and considerations. Just a little bit of an introduction. So the MSP recruitment model has been around for many years as an effective way for hirers whose use of large volumes of contractors or temporary workers. Now, this model effectively outsources the hiring, the management and payrolling of the workers to a specialist organisation who uses a mixture of software and their people to ensure that there is a slick process for hiring, onboarding and payrolling these workers. MSP recruitment models are often associated with some of the largest recruitment organisations in the world, and it is unusual to see smaller SME type agencies compete in this space. Many SME recruiters who have strong relationships with their hirers are keen to explore and understand if they can offer these types of services to ensure they strengthen, add value to their client relationships, which would also see increased revenues and significantly grow their product offering. However, there can be barriers that need to be overcome for agencies to make the leap. And today, we want to discuss at a high level some of those considerations to help recruitment directors establish a plan to make their ambition a reality. So I've just listed a few focus areas over the next sort of 35-40 minutes that we'll focus on. One being the market opportunity and the benefits to your business of providing MSP services. The key features of what a great MSP process looks and feels like, and also how Giant can help support you to offer world-class competitive service. Your speaker today will be Dan Haslam, Group Sales Director at Giant Group, and also a member of the FCSA board who has vast experience in helping recruiters and hirers manage their contingent workforce compliantly and cost effectively. By way of introduction, my name is Michael Howard, Head of Agency Sales here at Giant, and I have oversee and manage the agency support team here at Giant, and quite a few people on the call today I've probably already spoken to or met with of late as well. So today I'll be putting the questions to Dan in response to his description of the options. There is a Q&A on this webinar, so if you do have any questions as we move throughout the webinar, please do ask them as we go. We'll pick up as many as we can throughout today's webinar. And hopefully if we get through them all and we have time, we'll be able to come back to you with any specifics that you have throughout today's session. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an introduction and kicks off today's agenda. So I think, Dan, we're ready to go. So I think just to start off, would you please begin, Dan, with a look at the market opportunity and the reasons why providing MSP services isn't attractive to recruiters looking to grow?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the session. Well, I think there's a huge market out there, which might be a surprise for some people because, you know, MSP programs to help hirers manage contingent workforces is not a new thing, as you said. It's been around for a number of years now. There's, you know, some really, really large providers out there that operate MSP programs for corporate businesses. They tend to focus on opportunities where there's perhaps a few hundred going up towards thousands of contractors that are engaged, and those clients will often move between MSP providers over a prolonged period of time, and these programs have been running for years and years effectively. But when you move down to some of the SME market, where businesses that are still particularly, you know, can be particularly large, but they're perhaps engaging contractors between sort of 20 to 100 or maybe 150, then there's a huge gap in the market there. You don't see many of the MSP programs extending down to those sorts of numbers. What are the reasons for that? Well, the large providers will find it quite inefficient from a cost perspective to look at operating in that area, because a lot of the software provision that they use and the services that they need delivered by something called VMS providers, vendor management software providers. It's expensive kit. So these VMS software systems are designed to basically help the MSP provider release roles to recruitment agencies that sit underneath them to help fulfill roles, as well as often the large MSP also doing recruitment themselves as well. And this software is enterprise level software. It'll cost typically anything from £40,000 plus just to do an implementation, and then you've got ongoing fees as well. So clearly, if you're looking at small contractor populations, it's not really fit for purpose. So what often the large MSP programs ignore that part of the market, and what you then tend to see is hirers that are using that sort of level of contractors will use agency PSLs to both recruit the workers and also manage the workers. And typically those recruitment PSLs may have, I don't know, anything from sort of 5 to 10 different recruitment businesses on there. They're being used to do search and selection, and they're also being used to manage the workers as well. So that can definitely lead to some complexity in the supply chain, because you've got multiple suppliers involved there in terms of recruitment agencies that might be managing, 10 workers over here, and then another one's managing 5, another one over here. So a big variety of different software and processes that are being used for that contractor population, dependent upon which supplier they're using. And by that, I mean they could be using different timesheet software. So each recruitment agency would probably have its own recruitment timesheeting system. They might be going through multiple payroll providers. It's often the case there's various umbrella companies that sit underneath the recruitment business to support payroll. So you've got those in the mix as well. And also the recruitment suppliers might be being asked to also do the onboarding and pre-employment checking of these contractors as well. So again, you've got another piece of technology that could be being used there. And that can lead to quite a fragmented experience for the contractors. So if I give you a good example that we see frequently in the market, let's take timesheets, for example. So where a recruitment agency PSL is being used by a hirer, I've seen many as an example where the contractor is actually being asked to submit 2 or even 3 timesheets to get paid. So they have to submit one to the hirer. That might be paper-based, it could be electronic. They've then got to submit one to the agency as well. And if they're being engaged via a payroll company, like an umbrella company, they may have to be submitting a timesheet there as well. So 3 timesheets being submitted just to get one payment through. And clearly, if you've got multiple timesheets being submitted, then that just creates the opportunity for some errors and lack of reconciliation. If it can't be reconciled, it's going to delay payment. And we all know how contractors react to delayed payments. It's not a good thing. So I think they're the challenges that are out there, and that's the problem that I think the businesses that are on here today could absolutely solve if they wanted to push themselves into this MSP space. I think when you look at the contractors' concentrations by suppliers as well, often it's the case that there'll be 1 or 2 recruitment agencies that have the majority of those workers. And then there's a tail of 5 or 6 managing lower numbers. I think if you're doing that analysis and you're looking at your hirers and you're seeing that, yeah, we've got quite high numbers here and we believe we're the main supplier to that client, that's an absolute prime indicator for you to be thinking about, can we actually have a conversation here with that customer for us to elevate ourselves in the supply chain and become that managed service provider and manage the other recruitment agencies on that PSL. There's big benefits for the client in obviously engaging with one supplier. That gives them a lot more control because they've got one single point of contact. They've got one business that they're dealing with that's going to be managing the other suppliers, rather than having 6 or 7 different recruitment businesses to manage all at once. That should mean that they're able to make higher demands of that provider from an SLA perspective, so they should get better service. It should lead to a better candidate experience, which is critical given the talent shortages that everyone's experiencing at the moment. it's got to be a good experience for that contractor for them to want to work for that hire again. And I think, you know, thinking about it in terms of the benefits for the recruitment business that's made that jump, I think the big one is the fact that it brings you a lot closer to that client and really strengthens the relationship you have with that business as you become the main supplier. You will obviously have the opportunity of seeing the roles that are coming through, so you'll have an opportunity to get the better roles, and then the roles cascade down through the rest of that supply chain potentially. So it's going to generate good revenue for you guys. You've got ongoing revenue from the fees that you charge for delivering the service, but you could obviously increase your recruitment fees as a result as well. So commercially very attractive. And I think the other big thing that I've heard examples of, again, some of the people that are on the call today will recognise this, is that a lot of recruiters are sat there thinking, yeah, this would be a good step for us to make. This is the next, you know, thing that we can do as a business to grow and expand, but we didn't get around to doing so. And actually what's happened is someone else has come along and actually elevated themselves into that position, and it's bumped you down the value chain to the customer. So I've heard multiple examples of that happening recently. So it's one thing to have the opportunity, but you guys have obviously got some barriers in place, which we'll talk about later, that we can potentially help remove to make sure that you can make that jump. But absolutely, from a commercials perspective, there's a variety of different ways that these programs are structured. Often you're charging on a percentage basis for the amount of payroll turnover that's going through from the client, but you have an opportunity to do agreements that could be 2, 3, even 5 years long. So you've got good longevity of revenue coming through the business on top of the additional recruitment fees.
Thanks, Dan. All sounds very, very attractive, and obviously something for a lot of the people on this call to consider. I suppose just so we understand now the potential prize on offer, but what does a good process look like, and what are maybe some of the barriers or risks that some of the recruitment agencies on the call today should be mindful of, and how can we, you know, sort of minimize the impact that they may come across, really?
I think it depends on the client, really. So it really, you know, as all good sales is, it starts with some, you know, questioning to understand what are the challenges that client is facing at the moment that we think that the MSP program will solve. So obviously you would start with the talent acquisition piece at first. You know, are they happy with the quality of talent that's coming through from the current agencies? Is there an opportunity for more resource to be put forward from your business to help solve that as a challenge? Or is it more operational? Do they have no process at the moment? You know, 99% of the time when I'm speaking to a hirer directly, if I ask them how many contractors do you have, they don't know. And they don't know because they haven't got good control and a good process for onboarding those contractors. It's kind of quite reactive and managed in different parts of the business. So that in itself, if you're creating a program that can manage that spend for them, gives them a good opportunity to obviously reduce costs by having more data on what they're spending and where they're spending. Also, then it could be that the client's needs driven by risk. So I've seen, again, plenty of examples post of the IR35 changes where hirers have been using recruitment businesses to manage contractors, were working under the impression that they were being paid compliantly as per their IR35 process. But actually found examples where they thought contractors were being paid inside, but actually they were being processed outside by the recruitment business. And as we all know, that presents some risk up to the hirer. So it could be that there's some risk elements and compliance elements around that, but also candidate experience. You know, are they finding it easy to bring contractors on board? If there's been problems with payroll, there's been delays, it's not been a slick onboarding process, then, you know, we know these contractors are networked heavily, and that could reflect poorly on the hire as well. And sometimes it can be all of those different things as well. So you just need to really question the customer and understand where the opportunities are for you to position the service to them. You've obviously got the opportunity to support them with the with recruitment services on top of their additional team. So do they have an in-house team? Is that in-house team failing to deliver or struggling to manage the recruitment requirements because they're having to deal with some of the operational issues? If you're going to become a main supplier of the recruitment piece there, then that technical term around that is you becoming a master vendor. But you're still going to need a panel of agencies probably to support additional roles that need to be placed as well. So you also need to play nice, I suppose, with those other recruitment suppliers to manage them effectively. And that can be done in positive ways, making the process as slick and easy for those recruitment businesses to also payroll workers as it's required. VMS software, I've talked about that a couple of times. That could obviously help here if they wanted to bring a VMS solution in, but it is very expensive. There are good alternatives out there though, such as Giant Recruit, that can be used to do a basic VMS role without the sort of large setup costs that are required for some of the bigger products like Workday and People, Fluent and Beeline, etc. You're obviously within your business, you're also going to need to think about your ability to be able to manage and roll out IT effectively. You need to make sure that you can take your existing data and flow that through your back office systems, and then make sure that you can payroll out to the candidates in a slick and efficient way. So often that data has to be passed down to other suppliers as well. We've mentioned payroll companies. You could have international employer of records involved in a supply chain if it's a global opportunity that you're looking at. So data is key, and data needs to be able to flow quickly through the funnel. Again, when I see even the large MSP businesses and the way they've built up their back office process, it's often multiple different pieces of technology that all require integrations, and that can sometimes create issues in terms of a slick process. What we've tried to do with the Giant model that we'll talk about later is actually have a process where the data is fully integrated and just flows through by default. So there's no integrations as such because it's one platform that can manage everything from start to finish. Speed is absolutely key. So speed of onboarding, as we all know, talent's moving really quick out there. You need to get these guys pre-employment checked and onboarded quickly. So if you're reviewing software suppliers, make sure that that technology is mobile first. It's a must. And you're probably going to need, if there's a screening requirement for that client as well to do background checking, then you're going to need screening software in place with your own team to manage that, or you could potentially consider outsourcing it to a supplier as well. So there's quite a few considerations there in terms of software and to build out your product offering. I mentioned risk before and compliance risk. I think as you're moving yourself up the value chain and as you're moving closer to the hirers, they will expect you to be able to talk with confidence around compliance as well. So to help support de-risking their supply chain by you questioning and challenging the suppliers that you're engaging with to ensure that they are compliant, that you're doing regular audits, that you are also auditing service as well and making sure that they're performing as we would expect. And to do that, you need good reporting. So you need to make sure there's plenty of data there to be able to report on the volume of workers and the spend that's being taken by department, which recruitment business is supporting on supply and which payroll providers are being used as well. And if you can have a system that brings all that to life and gives full visibility, then that really does help in managing the risk down for those clients.
Thanks, Dan. Some really good ideas there in terms of processes, but also, barriers and risks that maybe people on this call have sort of thought about or wondered about probably previously. Just before we go on to, I suppose, the next part, which is around how Giant can support. For those that missed the start of the webinar, there is a Q&A button that you may want to ask any questions throughout today's session. There's been one or two recently that we'll pick up on shortly. Thanks very much to Phil for submitting that question. We'll pick up on them questions a little bit later on, but if anybody's got any questions on anything throughout today's session, please do use the Q&A session button, and we'll be more than happy to pick them up throughout the remainder of the webinar. But yeah, some really good things here to look at in terms of process and things to be mindful of, Dan. But I think probably one of the big areas that people are on the call to look at is how can Giant support agencies who are wanting to get into this MSP space, and what is it Giant can support them with?
Yes, I think everyone's obviously familiar with our brand, and Giant as an umbrella company is the link that everyone makes out there in the market, which is great because we've been doing it for so long. But umbrella now and that element of payroll only accounts for about 20% of our business. We, over the last probably decade really, have been building out the service lines that we offer as part of our group. So we've got the Giant Precision system that's been the pay and bill system used by the likes of Michael Page in the UK, US and Canada for years, as well as Morgan McKinley, Sellick and other agencies. So we've had that infrastructure to build out from. We've recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, added Giant Screening into the equation. So that's the fastest growing pre-employment checking business in the UK now, which we're really pleased about. Giant Global, we started this year, so that's us now moving to international employer of record. We've got companies in Holland, Ireland. We're setting up the US at the moment, and we're looking at other countries in Europe as well to flesh that out. So huge expansion in the services that we offer. And whilst we've been building out those solutions, we've been doing it in such a way that the software is fully integrated. And that is absolutely key when you look at the efficiencies that can be delivered when you look at putting an MSP program together that needs to pull all those component parts. So if you can imagine, if we're doing pre-employment checking, we can take that candidate information that we've got within that part of our system and flow that immediately to the pay and bill system without the need for that candidate record to be re-entered. If the client's using hasn't got any authorized time mechanism, we can bring in our timesheet system that will sit in there, capture the time that's being worked by all those workers, and then self-bill everything down to all the suppliers without the need for invoices to be being raised for payment from the customer. And again, we'll all have experience of invoices not getting paid on time and delays, which ultimately ends in the contractors receiving delays as well. So we're really pleased with the way that we've built out the solution now, so that it gives this platform that would effectively enable a small recruiter to have all the sort of tools and bells of whistles that a large global MSP provider would have. And in actual fact, a lot of those MSP providers actually back off a lot of this service to Giant anyway through our various products that I've been through. So to knit all that together and give that to you guys means you can go from zero to market ready with a world-class, ISO accredited system to be able to deliver a really slick and polished MSP service that's white labeled. So everything that we do can be white labeled. So that's your proposition that you're taking forward. But underneath that, you've got the benefit of having a great supplier like Giant. And I think it's also key, Michael, to point out that not only do we look at providing software here, we're also providing people. So that's one of the big barriers that I see when recruiters are considering making this jump is, well, we're going to have to increase our headcount. We've got to take new people on to run this program. That's going to be a big cost. Well, the way that we've built this model out is that we will price on a percentage basis. So we're only going to charge you guys when you're making money. So if you don't make money, we don't make money, but vice versa. So you're not having to look at incremental headcount costs. You're not having to look at acquiring multiple expensive software products. You can basically just take the platform forward, push the volume through it, and then build it out from there. So I think that's really important to point out. I think the other one is also a distraction that some recruiters worry about in terms of, well, if we go for this MSP opportunity, is that going to distract my business from business as usual? Which could be the case if you're looking to have to do all these things in-house. But if you outsource it, it gives you a great starting point to get the MSP proposition off and running. And you might come, after a year or two, you might start to look at build out more of your delivery internally if that's what you want to do. It's funny because I see that full circle coming back round with some of the larger providers who then build it in themselves internally, bring it in-house, and then they bring it back out again to someone like us because of cost and delivery. But so wherever you are in that circle, we can offer a solution. I think RFPs is probably the last one to mention, Michael. So when you start to look at putting technology in place with your client, then they'll come back with sometimes some quite onerous RFPs on info security, questionnaires on IT. Again, Giant have got world-class software and cyber security, so we can easily help support you in those RFPs and tick those boxes to make sure that the customer's comfortable that you're delivering a service that's got the right level of security and a robust platform behind it.
Thanks, Dan. It sounds like Giant cover pretty much everything in terms of the end-to-end support, technology, people, compliance. So a lot to sort of give the people on today's session thought around what we can do to help if people are wanting to get into that sort of space. I just want to pick up on the point you mentioned earlier about possibility of attracting talent from overseas. I think we all come from, the recruitment world, and we've obviously had challenges of COVID and the I-35 challenges over the last couple of years, and more talent are now coming from further afield. So, in the past, maybe hirers have perhaps not considered this as an opportunity, either because they've had not enough local talent or because it was a totally unknown quantity. In your vast experience, can you describe what you'd need to have in place and also how it would work?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a trend post-COVID, probably where it's accelerated, where contractors have been moving around a lot more. I mean, we know through our own workers we engage directly, we thought we were managing a UK-based population, and then COVID hit, and all of a sudden people are off in Biarritz and their holiday homes in Portugal working, and good for them. But it does obviously present some interesting tax challenges when you've got people doing roles that are based in countries where they might or should be paying tax. So it has to be managed, and you need to understand and have a process around ensuring you know who you're engaging and where they're based. But I think more recently, it's really the talent shortage in the UK that is driving recruiters to start looking at attracting talent overseas, both the in-house talent teams, but also recruitment businesses as well. So we've certainly seen through the customers that we engage with, particularly for roles that are based in professional services and IT in particular, there's a lot of recruitment going on in areas like Eastern Europe, where they've got the skill sets over there to be able to deliver the various IT programming languages that clients require. But the income tax that you pay in places like Czech Republic and Romania, for example, is low. I think it's about 10 and 15% in those areas. So not only have you got Romanian-based contractors that are now working on UK-based contracts, you've actually also got UK contractors going over and locating in these countries to actually benefit from the reduced income tax. So long story short, this globalization that we've all been experiencing in the world is just accelerating, and that is happening now around contracting. It's not unsurmountable to bring contractors in from overseas. You just need a process around it. Just in the same way you have a process around onboarding employees, it's the same for contractors. What is key is to make sure you've got an idea of working in the right jurisdictions, because some places are trickier than others. So I mentioned two there that are good for income tax purposes, but you need to make sure that legislation-wise it's quite a stable country and it's not changing legislation on a regular basis. So Scandinavia is probably a good example of that. Places like Denmark and Norway, relatively stable governments there. They have tax regimes in place now that are built out specifically for contracting. So it's quite a contractor friendly area. So that's a good place for people to potentially look at sourcing their own talent. You need to make sure your onboardings can cope, your onboarding process can cope with looking at talent from overseas. So if there's background checks required, DBS checks or the equivalent in country, then you need to make sure you're operating with a screening provider that can do those checks abroad, which I'm pleased to say Giant Screening operate internationally. So we're happy to have those conversations with people. And then the last bit's payroll. So in the same way in the UK, you're focused on the compliance of your UK-based payroll businesses. It doesn't get any different internationally. In fact, it's probably even more Wild West, shall we say, in the international space as it can be in the UK. So make sure you've got the right payroll providers that you're engaging. Make sure they understand the legislation in country. They've got the right licenses that they need to be able to engage those foreign workers and bring them into the program. But I think you're going to see the talent attraction of workers from overseas just continually increasing. The talent shortages aren't getting any better in the UK. I think we're up to full employment virtually, and for the last 7 months concurrently, we've seen a decrease in perm hiring and an increase in contract hiring. So it's a dogfight out there for talent, and you're going to see many businesses looking further afield to try and address that.
Thanks, Dan. Some really good insights there for sort of talent overseas, not just the UK. And I think obviously, you know, as mentioned, since COVID, it's obviously accelerated the need for overseas and local talent requirements. So some really good insights there. And I think that over the last sort of half an hour or so, it covers quite a lot of the processes and the benefits of managing contractors in-house. So there has been quite probably 3 or 4 questions already been submitted throughout the last half an hour from the people on today's call. So I'll get through some of them, Dan, and sort of see if we've got any quick answers for the people on today's session. So
you're gonna look at picking out the complex ones for me, probably, Michael, and put me on the spot.
I'll definitely start off with the complex ones, indeed. I think one that really comes to mind and has probably been asked in a number of ways from a few people on today's session is regarding fees. So I suppose, how are the agency fees affected? You know, is the fee still the same if we're managing contractors and using systems and processes? Could you just maybe sort of elaborate a little bit on the fees element, please?
Yes, I think if you're talking about the fees for the recruitment business that's going to elevate themselves into that MSP position, then you'll be charging 2 sets of fees probably. Currently you've got a recruitment fee, which is a percentage charge on top of the contractor's day rate or hourly rate. And what you would also then be charging in addition to that is an MSP fee, which, as I said, tends to be done on a percentage basis, although you can get some models that will operate on a per worker per week basis as well. Our systems can handle both of those options. Percentages tends to be the main one. The reason for that is because often there's a funding requirement. So as we all know, hirers like to ask us for 30, 60, 90, or even I've had 120 days mentioned recently, funding. So if you're going to deal with that, then on a percentage basis, it's a lot easier to work than a per worker per week fixed. So it should therefore create an additional revenue for that recruiter because you've got an additional fee being charged for the managed service. In terms of existing agencies that are also involved on that PSL, it really depends how their margins might be affected moving forward. So if it's a cost driver that's one that the client's looking to bring the MSP in, then yeah, there could be some downward pressure on those recruitment agencies on their margin. But not always the case. You know, you can't push recruitment suppliers too far, or they won't want to resource on the roles, and the client's got these talent attraction problems that they need to manage as well. So I think there's a spectrum of what can work there from a pricing perspective. Just means the program has to be built out properly. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do with the model that we've generated at Giant is allow the recruitment suppliers to get paid as quickly as possible for the fees that they're generating without bogging them down in non-core recruitment services like pre-employment checking, as an example. We'll manage that internally here at Giant to allow that recruitment business just to focus on search and selection. So in a lot of areas where that recruiter PSLs maintain their margins, they're actually in effect making more money now than they were before, because they're not having to do onboarding check-in, they're not having to raise invoices because we're doing everything self-bill. They're not having to do funding because potentially on some of our deals, Giant are actually cash flowing that and funding it as well. Which takes a lot of pressure away from those recruitment businesses to just get on with what they really want to be doing, which is search and selection and placing people. I was a bit long-winded, but hopefully covered the point.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. It's interesting just to get a steer on, where agencies sort of see themselves maybe in the short term, medium term, or whether they've, looked at this as an avenue to explore previously, and, getting expert advice, getting information on how these sort of things could work, I suppose is invaluable. And I'll just flip back to another couple of questions, if I may, Dan. I suppose one of the key questions that has been mentioned on today's session is how it would work with the existing recruitment agencies, and would you have to effectively replace their timesheet and payment process? Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, you don't have to, and in a lot of the traditional MSP programs, those recruitment suppliers are still using their own timesheeting systems to then generate invoices up and then payments down. I see that though as highly, highly inefficient and not desirable though. And I've mentioned a few times this phrase self-bill, which basically means that payment will come down from the supplier above down to the supplier underneath, based on that authorized time, which is usually captured by one central system. Now, for a lot of large businesses, they will already have this VMS software in place that might well capture that time and cascade it down to suppliers that need it. So great, there's a solution there, you just need to integrate with it. But in a lot of areas, there isn't that software. So we would, in our model, deploy Giant's timesheeting system, which is used by 30,000 contractors a month now, I'm pleased to say. To be able to manage that process, make sure there's one point of, one timesheet being authorized by that hiring manager, and that information's fed all the way down the supply chain. All the suppliers can access it on our portal and get a detailed breakdown, hours worked, days worked, rates paid. So they're not having to request the candidate to submit another timesheet. And I gave that example earlier, happens frequently. Why should a contractor be asked to submit timesheets 3 and 4 times over? Just get the supply chain to talk to each other and give the information down and just make it as slick a process as possible.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It makes complete sense for more efficiencies to help support the supply chain. So hopefully that's helped answer a few questions. We've just had one just coming now, Dan, actually, as well, about conduct regs. Presumably they'll remain in place for an MSP?
Yeah, conduct regs would still apply. That would need to be in your MSA agreement that you'd have up between you and your client, but then also flow down to the suppliers. So it's just as it is with many of the contractual points, it's a flow through down. And the decision on conduct regs and the ticking of it of opting in and opting out ultimately would sit with the recruitment supplier that's furthest down the supply chain in the end, but contractually it has to be back to back all the way through.
Thanks, Dan. Just a couple more questions. Want to make sure we maximise the audience we have. So you mentioned earlier about overseas talent and talent in local areas, but I suppose, is it possible to work with candidates from any country, or would it potentially not work in certain areas maybe?
Well, technically it's possible for any country. I think for obvious reasons, China and Russia would be 2 particular areas that many businesses wouldn't want to play in for all the political reasons that we know about. And then it's just down to some areas are easier than others. As I said before, you want to be thinking about picking territories to operate in where the legislation's pretty stable, the income tax levels are not too onerous. So generally Europe is not too bad in certain areas, although countries like France and Germany can be challenging because they have certain laws around licensing and how many suppliers can be involved in a supply chain. But again, Giant have got the sophistication to construct a variety of different contract models to make sure that that can work. So it's all up for grabs. I think you take Africa and Latin America, then again, there's risks associated with operating in some of those areas. And therefore you need to make sure that you've got the right partner that you're playing with, that's doing everything compliantly, and not just ticking boxes on an RFP, but actually you're testing it, you're checking paperwork to make sure it's being managed appropriately. But no, there should be no limitation to where you can operate, just some places are easier than others.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think a question that's been asked probably in a number of ways from the audience for today is, clearly there's a appetite here for people on today's session in regards to maybe looking at the MSP world, but do you specifically maybe have any examples or case studies where maybe this approach of moving into that MSP environment has worked, and anything you can share on that at all?
Yeah, there's a few examples where we've helped support businesses to step up into that arena. So CLO, which is a well-known RPO business, moved into the managed service provider market a number of years ago, and that's been a great partnership between Giant and those guys, and they are rapidly increasing the number of clients that they're operating with. So that's really pleasing. There's other RPOs that we're in conversations with at the moment that are making that step up. But also recruitment businesses, there's examples now where we've got a particular client that we've helped those recruitment businesses support, and they've done the first MSP program, and everyone's been really pleased at how that's gone, and they're now looking at taking it to market to their other clients as well. So at Giant, we're here to support you guys, whether it's the payroll we're doing, whether it's the software we're providing. This is about us trying to take all the headaches away from contingent workforce management. Apart from search and selection, we're never going to go there. That's for you guys, and we'll leave you guys happily to deal with that one. But everything else around it, we want to take that away. So there should be no barriers to you looking at expanding into the market. And I said internationally as well now, which is super exciting. And it's a partnership. It really is a partnership. There'll be some cases where we'll actually support the recruitment businesses in a side-by-side conversation with those clients. So I think the way we see it, where it works best, is where there's no point in pretending that the recruiter's delivering all this stuff when it's actually us and behind. If you take Alexander Mann, for example, they're a big client of ours, and we regularly engage with their customers with AMS side by side in those conversations, and it's a great partnership, and it works really well. So we'd love to promote that model to the SME recruiters that are on the call today.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, quite a few people asking about sort of examples, and it's great to show that what we've done, it isn't just a sort of a last minute thing and something that we just thought might work. We've got sort of years and years of examples and case studies where this has not only worked but has developed that relationship from agency to customer. So yeah, no, fantastic. I think we've got through all of the questions we've had from today's audience, and again, just as stated at the start, we're conscious of everybody's time. It's the first full week back in May in terms of not a bank holiday until the next one in a few weeks. So really appreciate all of your time, and hopefully you found it useful. Please do get in touch if you require any further information or support on this topic. If you have left us your email address, we'll send you a copy of the recording and the Q&A transcript, and we'll also send you details for Dan, who's obviously the expert within this field, and more than happy to help have continued conversations and dialogue on this topic. So thanks very much from me. Thank you for Dan for being today's expert on today's session, and really enjoyable webinar for today. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers, Dan.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Cheers.